Because of what I'm about to say, I really should establish my green credentials. When I was a small boy, I took my pledge as an American to save and faithfully to defend from waste the natural resources of my country, its air, soil, and minerals, its forests, waters, and wildlife. And I've stuck to that. Stanford, I majored in ecology and evolution. 1968, I brought out the Whole Earth Catalog, was Mr. Natural for a while, and then worked for the Jerry Brown administration. The Brown administration and a bunch of my friends basically leveled the energy efficiency of California, so it's the same now 30 years later, even though our economy has gone up by 80% per capita. And we are putting out less greenhouse gases than any other state. California is basically the equivalent of Europe in this. This year, Whole Earth Catalog has a supplement that I'll preview today called Whole Earth Discipline. The dominant demographic event of our time is the screamingly rapid urbanization that we have going on. By mid-century, we'll be about 80% urban, and that's mostly in the developing world where that's happening. It's interesting because history is driven to a large degree by the size of cities. The developing world now has all of the biggest cities, and they are developing 3 times faster than the developed countries and 9 times bigger. It's qualitatively different. They're the drivers of history, as we see by looking at history. 1,000 years ago, this was what the world looked like. Well, we now have a distribution of urban power similar to what we had 1,000 years ago. In other words, the rise of the West, dramatic as it was, is over. The aggregate numbers are absolutely overwhelming. 1.3 million people a week coming to town, decade after decade. What's really going on? Well, what's going on is the villages of the world are emptying out. Subsistence farming is drying up, basically. People are following opportunity into town, and this is why. I used to have a very romantic idea about villages, and it's because I never lived in one. Because in town, this is the bustling squatter city of Kibera, near Nairobi. They see action, they see opportunity, they see a cash economy that they were not able to participate in back in the subsistence farm. As you go around these places, there's plenty of aesthetics, there's plenty going on. They're poor, but they're intensely urban, and they're intensely creative. The aggregate numbers now are that basically squatters, all 1 billion of them, are building the urban world, which means they're building the world. Personally, one by one, family by family, clan by clan, neighborhood by neighborhood. They start flimsy and they get substantial as time goes by. They even build their own infrastructure. Well, steal their own infrastructure. At first, cable TV, water, the whole gamut, all gets stolen. And then gradually gentrifies. It is not the case that slums undermine prosperity, not the working slums. They help create prosperity. So in a town like Mumbai, which is half slums, it's 1/6 of the GDP of India. Social capital in the slums is at its most urban and dense. These people are valuable as a group, and that's how they work. There's a lot of people who get control of these poor people. There's terrible things that we've got to fix their housing. It used to be we've got to get them phone service. Now they're showing us how to do phone service. Famine mostly is a rural event now. There are things they care about. And this is where we can help, and the nations they're in can help, and they are helping each other solve these issues. And you go to a nice, dense place like this slum in Mumbai, you look at that lane on the right, and you can ask, okay, what's going on there? And the answer is everything. This is better than the mall. It's much denser, it's much more interactive, and the scale is terrific. The main event is these are not people crushed by poverty. These are people busy getting out of poverty just as fast as they can. They're helping each other do it. They're doing it through an outlaw thing, the informal economy. The informal economy, it's sort of like dark energy in astrophysics. It's not supposed to be there, but it's huge. We don't understand how it works yet, but we have to. Furthermore, people in the informal economy, the gray economy, as time goes by, crime is happening around them, and they can join the criminal world. Or they can join the legitimate world. We should be able to make that choice easier for them to get toward the legitimate world, because if we don't, they will go toward the criminal world. There's all kinds of activity. In Nairobi, the slum performs not only a lot of services for itself, but enormous services for the city at large. And one of the main events are these ad hoc schools. The parents pool their money, hire some local teachers, do a private, tiny, unofficial school. Education is more possible in the cities, and that changes the world. Now you see some interesting typical urban things, of one thing slammed up against another, such as in Sao Paulo here. That's what cities do. That's how they create value, is by slamming things together. In this case, supply right next to demand. And so the maids and the gardeners and the guards that live in this lively part of town on the left walk to work in the boring, rich neighborhood. Proximity is amazing. We are learning about how dense proximity can be. Connectivity between the city and the country is what's going to keep the country good. Because the city has interesting ways of doing things. This is what makes cities. This is what makes cities so green in the developing world, because people leave the poverty trap and the ecological disaster of subsistence farms and head to town. When they're gone, the natural environment starts to come back very rapidly, and those who remain in the village can shift over to cash crops to send food to the new growing markets in town. So if you want to save a village, you do it with a good road, with a good cell phone connection, and ideally some grid electrical power. So the event is, we're a city planet. That just happened. More than half. The numbers are considerable. 1 billion live in the squatter cities now. Another 1 billion is expected. That's more than 1/6 of humanity living a certain way. And that will determine a lot of how we function. Now, for us environmentalists, maybe the greenest thing about the cities is they defuse the population bomb. People get into town, they immediately have fewer children. They don't even have to get rich yet. Just the opportunity of coming up in the world means they will have fewer, higher quality kids, and the birth rate goes down radically. Very interesting side effect, here's a slide from Philip Longman, shows what is happening. As we have more and more old people, like me, and fewer babies, and they're regionally separated, what you're getting is a world which is old folks in old cities going around doing things the old way in the north, and young people in brand new cities they're inventing, doing new things in the south. Where do you think the action is going to be? Shift of subject. Quickly drop by climate. The climate news, is, I'm sorry to say, is going to keep getting worse than we think, faster than we think. Climate is a profoundly complex, nonlinear system full of runaway positive feedbacks, hidden thresholds, and irrevocable tipping points. Here's just a few samples. We're going to keep being surprised, and almost all the surprises are going to be bad ones. From your standpoint, this means a great increase in climate refugees over the coming decades, and what goes along with that, which is resource wars and chaos wars, as we're seeing in Darfur. That's what drought does. It brings carrying capacity down, and there's not enough carrying capacity to support the people, and then you're in trouble. Shift to the power situation. Baseload electricity is what it takes to run a city or a city planet. So far, there's only 3 sources of baseload electricity: coal, some gas, nuclear, and hydro. Of those, only nuclear and hydro are green. Coal is what is causing the climate problems, and everyone will keep burning it because it's so cheap until governments make it expensive. Wind and solar can't help because so far we don't have a way to store that energy. So with hydro maxed out, coal and lose the climate, or nuclear, which is the current operating low carbon source, and maybe save the climate. And if we can eventually get good solar in space, that also could help. Because remember, this is what drives the prosperity in the developing world, in the villages and in the cities. So between coal and nuclear, compare their waste products. If all of the electricity you used in your lifetime was nuclear, the amount of waste that would be added up to would fit in a Coke can. Whereas a coal burning plant, a normal 1 gigawatt coal plant, burns 80 rail cars of coal a day, each car having 100 tons. And it puts 18,000 tons of carbon dioxide in the air. So, and then when you compare the lifetime emissions of these various energy forms, nuclear is about even with solar and wind, and ahead of solar. Oh, sorry, with hydro and wind ahead of solar. And does nuclear really compete with coal? Just ask the coal miners in Australia. That's where you see some of the source, not from my fellow environmentalists, but from people who feel threatened by nuclear power. Well, the good news is that the developing world, but frankly the whole world, is busy building and starting to build nuclear reactors. This is good for the atmosphere, it's good for their prosperity. I want to point out one interesting thing, which is that environmentalists like a thing we call micropower. This is supposed to be, local solar and wind and cogeneration and good things like that. But frankly, microreactors, which are just now coming on, might serve even better. The Russians who started this are building floating reactors for their new passage where the ice is melting north of Russia, and they're selling these floating reactors only 35 megawatts to developing countries. Here's a design, an early one from Toshiba. It's interesting. You say take a 25 megawatt, 25 million watts, and compare it to the standard big iron of an ordinary Westinghouse or Areva, which is 1.2, 1.6 billion watts. These things are way smaller. They're much more adaptable. Here's an American design from Lawrence Livermore Lab. Here's another American design that came out of Los Alamos and is now commercial. Almost all of these are not only small, they're proliferation proof. They're typically buried in the ground, and the innovation is moving very rapidly. So I think microreactors is going to be important in the future. In terms of proliferation, nuclear energy has done more to dismantle nuclear weapons than any other activity. And that's why 10% of the electricity in this room, 20% of the electricity in this room is probably nuclear. Half of that is coming from dismantled